Awesome. Thank you. So, thanks everyone. Greetings from Canada. And thanks in advance for your listening and consideration. I invite any feedback on this. This is sort of just some new thoughts that I had over the past month or so with the lead up to the WWE Hall of Fame ceremony, WrestleMania weekend, etc. All right. If professional wrestling is, as Barth's off-cited quotation states, really a spectacle of excess, then there's no time and place more evident for this spectacle than WrestleMania weekend. Starting off WrestleMania weekend at the very odd time of 1 a.m. in the morning, overnight, Friday to Saturday, was the WWE's annual Hall of Fame ceremony. A presented recognition of the past, the WWE's Hall of Fame inducts professional wrestling legends into its non-existent halls each spring. But is this Hall of Fame truly a representation of professional wrestling's history? Or is it just another event to sell tickets, to build up the WWE's business, and exploit past practitioners of the sport for its own propaganda machine? By speaking to each of this year's inductees, this brief presentation will consider whether the WWE Hall of Fame truly is an accurate representation of professional wrestling history, in order to critique the ways in which this ceremony rewrites and renegotiates the problematic history of the WWE, its wrestlers, and the art form itself for its capitalistic purposes. This essay functions mostly as a simple critique of the WWE Hall of Fame as it currently exists. I invite suggestions for theoretical or methodological approaches to future work on this topic, particularly as it relates to memory and nostalgia as a form of propaganda. So, as previously noted, the WWE Hall of Fame ceremony was held in the wee hours of the morning, starting at 1 a.m. on Saturday, April 19th. This year's Hall of Fame inductees include the current head of creative for the company, a recently redeemed but publicly judged to be murderer, a female wrestling legend inducted by her husband, a nostalgic tag team with fat-phobic connotations, and one of the best matches of all time. This varied list of inductees, and my somewhat tongue-in-cheek way of listing them here, indicate quite clearly that the WWE Hall of Fame is a wide-ranging space. That being said, each of these inductees also represent some shaky ground for discussion of whether their induction into the Hall of Fame is based purely on merit, or if redemption, political behind-the-scenes deal-making, company profits, company loyalty, or any of combination of these things are actually what's doing the work. This essay will discuss each of last week's inductees into the Hall of Fame based on these aforementioned grounds. Then, by comparing these most recent inductees to inductees of the past, to consider whether the WWE's Hall of Fame is actually constructed as a testament to the true history and glorification of professional wrestling, or if it's just another somewhat exploitative attempt by the company to monopolize and then further exploit its own workers for the profits of company shareholders and the like. Now, the first category that I've identified, which might be the most seemingly innocuous, is still laden with company directives. Throughout the Hall of Fame's existence, particular wrestlers, personalities, managers have been inducted due to their large dedication to the WWE itself, rather than as a representation of the art form as a whole. This isn't a crazy idea, but one that, despite WWE's illusions and many fan assumptions, shows that the WWE Hall of Fame isn't a memorial to professional wrestling itself, but to the very specific history of the WWE. Inductees such as Gorilla Monsoon, Pat Patterson, Vincent J. McMahon, VKM's father are important personalities to the history of wrestling as a whole, sure. But being that they are, some of the first inductees into the Hall of Fame over its first 5 years, shows that there's always been a sort of privileging of WWF, WE personalities. Past WWF champions and behind-the-scenes legends always seem to be some of the first inducted members into the Hall of Fame, which means there's always a particular emphasis on the dedication to the company itself. It is not necessarily the fact that WWE privileges its own figures within their Hall of Fame that is problematic, but also the way in which other figures within the history of professional wrestling have been diminished due to their ability to be less monetized. This is probably the most evident in the WWE's legacy wing, where less marketable figures can be inducted into the Hall of Fame as a sort of performative procedure, but are not given extensive coverage as to their actual influence on the industry more broadly. As Dave Meltzer has criticized, this is the category they, the WWE, use to honor people who, for whatever reason, they don't feel are marketable names to the modern audience. with names such as Ed Strangler Lewis, Frank Gotch, George Hackenschmidt, Lou Thez, and Mildred Burke being amongst them. Induction into these Hall of Fames across different sports and art forms is often not linear chronologically, but one would think that the actual people who have laid the groundwork to define and create the sport and art form should get more recognition than just a simple listing of names adjacent to the ceremony itself. Now, the next name and category that I'd like to discuss is related to Michelle McCool. I don't want to imply here that she doesn't deserve to be in a wrestling Hall of Fame, but there is something quite odd about her induction into the Hall of Fame by her husband. I can't help but feel like maybe there's some political stuff going on. I mean, if The Undertaker pushes to have his wife in the Hall of Fame, who's going to say no? I find it particularly uh, nefarious considering that China still isn't in the Hall of Fame as an individual wrestler, despite her being one of the first wrestlers to be taken seriously as an independent competitor in the presence, especially in the era she came in, which was a particularly, masculine driven and misogynistic era of the WWE. But due to some of her problematic public issues, her omission from the Hall of Fame seems to have a somewhat clear reasoning from the company's perspective. This brings us to the next category of identification, which is the WWE Hall of Fame's propensity for the privileging the redemption story, with its alternative of those being at odds with the company due to their outside behavior or association with rival promotions kind of being cast aside. This year's candidate for this portion would be Lex Luger, having previously received a lot of blame for the death of Miss Elizabeth. However, after recent acknowledgement of his partial fault in her death due to their addictions and a physical rehabilitation alongside DDP and his yoga company, the company WWE obviously saw both of these things as an opportunity for them to co-opt one man's personal journey towards redemption for their own purposes. And if this may seem a little bit skeptical of their intentions, I think what drives home this point is that, in the context, is their inability to allow or procure Sting, maybe the wrestler most attached to his career, in the WCW at the very least. While reports differ as to the particular reason why they couldn't get him, it has been reported that the WWE did not even reach out to see if this was a possibility. Furthermore, despite Paul Heyman's induction into the Hall of Fame last year, it seems that many ECW wrestlers, a promotion from which many ideas for the Attitude Era itself were borrowed, do not make it into the Hall of Fame unless, of course, they have also been a significant part of the WWE's past. I can only conjecture that this might be due to the fact that in giving credit to performers from this promotion, WWE might also have to admit that not every idea that they ever come up with was their own. Some wrestlers that have meant a lot to professional wrestling more broadly from this promotion include Sabu, Tommy Dreamer, The Sandman, and Shane Douglas. This is all to say that the specific reason some names go into the Hall of Fame before or over others is unclear. What is clear, however, is that those who get inducted offer something to the company through their marketability or for the purposes of financial or economic benefits. I think it would be an interesting study, if possible, to see how much merch sales increase for these figures that are inducted in a given year. Although I'm not sure how easily you could hone in on merch statistics for particular names. The next category is related to the natural disasters induction. While Fred Ottman, Typhoon, is still alive, I find posthumous inductions particularly objectionable, considering that the very first Hall of Fame ceremony occurred only 2 months following the death of Andre the Giant. To put it plainly, inducting somebody into a Hall of Fame after they've died is a particularly shitty way of co-opting the person's death for company purposes, without giving them flowers while the person is in question is still alive to receive them. Another historical example of this is the way that the WWE co-opted the Ultimate Warrior's death following his induction, whereby following his acrimonious split from the company, the WWE made sure to make an award in his honor. Despite his ostracization from the company for nearly 20 years prior, the WWE were quick to jump on this opportunity to utilize his own name for their purposes. This year, a new official type of induction was introduced in the gamut of things, which was the matches being inducted. While it isn't, oh, sorry. Yeah, the WWE's begin to choose in specific matches to be inducted to the Hall of Fame. While I personally feel like there are a few better matches to be the first induction for this category, this choice to add another category to the list of potential ways individuals can be inducted seems like a suspicious tactic to continue to garner fan support. Although it isn't far-fetched to realize that the WWE's propensity for multi-induction might be simply related to their fascination for breaking records. I mean, one can hear them saying, and now four-time Hall of Fame inductee Bret the Hitman Hart, as a way of stirring up fan fervor. So, I spent most of this essay just critiquing how the WWE operates as Hall of Fame. What would be the solution of a better way to operate such an entity? I know that it would be very rare for a company as large and as connected to the entertainment and sports industry to not operate such a thing. I mean, all of the major sports leagues have their halls of fame, so why not the WWF? What I think could be particularly useful in making the process of induction more transparent is some sort of explanation of the reasoning for why certain inductees get inducted each year. It would be useful to know what their criteria is for induction, or whether it is truly just an arbitrary process or one that just comes as names sort of reveal themselves as worthy to the company. I think maybe also giving fans a say into who gets inducted would be useful. Fan polls or voting would also potentially allow for a more varied representation of those inducted into the Hall of Fame. Also, and of course, giving equal time to individuals from the annals and margins of professional wrestling history would be incredibly beneficial for a more robust representation within this particular entity. Finally, just as a final example of a particularly unique stance of someone who didn't want to get, who hasn't been inducted to the Hall of Fame, I'd like to just talk about Owen Hart. Related to his death and with the WWE, Owen Hart's wife, Martha, has publicly stated that while she's forgiven WWE, she'll never allow him to be inducted into their Hall of Fame. At the end of the day, this is a brave stance, but also what I think is the correct one. Whether or not the WWE is responsible for Owen's death specifically, or if it was the harness maker, the back and forth between the company and his estate is a little bit over the top from WWE's perspective, at least. But the WWE, and particularly Vince's decision to continue the show after his death, is the one that resonates in Martha's decision to not allow Owen's legacy to be used as just another marketing ploy and tactic for company profit. Her refusal to succumb to the company's motivations and insistence on upholding her own ethical code, while somewhat of a necessity, is also an aspirational choice. If only the WWE would privilege a bit more of this type of ethical consideration as to their operation of their own Hall of Fame, and not put profits over people. While I do think that there is a place for a Hall of Fame within the company, having a bit more consideration into the optics of certain choices or exclusions would be beneficial, as that to not exploit the already exploited wrestlers of the past. I am also aware that sometimes offering up potential solutions to these type of business issues might actually be beneficial for a company, so maybe this short essay should have been plainly more critical. That being said, I hope that this essay has offered just a brief overview of the problem addicts associated with the Hall of Fame as it currently exists, and I welcome criticism, critiques, suggestions for further work on this topic. I know that this presentation hasn't been particularly academic, with no theoretical basis, but I did want to get something out there regarding this somewhat niche element of the professional wrestling space. Furthermore, I hope that this essay has been useful in summarizing at least some of the issues with the WWE Hall of Fame. I probably missed names and particular scenarios where some of these issues could be further illuminated, but I hope to continue work on this topic, adding in some theoretical stuff in the future and further critiquing this particular thing, because I wanted to bring some of these critiques out of the space in which it's most often seen, where I see a lot of the online wrestling community critiquing this, and I think there's room for it in academia.